My name's Kate Borland, and I come from a family of a very interesting family, and my great-great-grandfather actually invented Victoria Bitter. So he was one of the first brewery owners in Victoria. Hence, it runs in my family. I have a good understanding of, over drinking, whatever you want to call it. And I'm now actually 28 years sober myself. And so I'm very passionate about this work and recovery. And so I made a cold call one day to a detox unit in Melbourne, which was one of the largest detox units, and they were developing a pilot program which was called Catalyst, which is still running today. It was an award-winning program in its first years. And they said to me, we want to have nutrition in that program. It was a 6-week course. And I would run the nutrition sessions for 4 of the 6 weeks. So it was non-residential, so really changing how we looked at recovery models, detox units, and there was a number of really interesting sort of modalities within that program. We did cognitive behavioural therapy, art therapy, there was nutrition, there was exercise, there was drumming. So it was really looking at the person holistically. And I was very nervous when I first started, but it was incredible. From the very first session, the engagement, because the nutrition side of what I was doing was not mandatory, it was an elective. And week after week, people would come back. And so the Uniting, which was who I was working for, realised, wow, this is really working, because it allows people a safe space. It's actually providing them with a skill. And it breaks up the week, so it's not just very heavy duty looking at addiction and why people end out in the situations they're in. So that one program, I then, because of word of mouth, I was asked to write a program for their youth detox unit, which I ran also for 14 years. Then I was asked to do the adult detox unit, which was a 16-bed unit. It became, in my 15 years working there, we then had the first mother-baby unit in, I think, Australia. So mothers would give birth and then they would come in. And I was there every Friday. So in the beginning, I was just delivering a program, which was, my programs were always very interactive. They weren't just me standing and talking to people. I used amazing things as props, and I really started talking about how we can take personal inventory and responsibility for our behaviours, and how our lives can grow and become so magical if we start at that beginning place, which is we're going to be going through the grieving process and giving something up. So I was working there every Friday. Then they said they were building a whole new detox unit that included the mother-baby. And they asked me to write the menu. So a 7 to 14-day menu. I have an example, and I'm happy to share any information with people. But I developed a series of recipes and recipe cards. And the idea was that people weren't going to be stuck in their room. They were going to come out of their room. There was no dishwasher. People would gather around the sink. They'd have amazing conversations, and they'd also be in charge of cooking the food they were eating, and they'd do it on a rotational basis. So everybody got a go of learning the recipes, and then they got to take the recipe cards home. Now, all the recipes I designed obviously were specific around our vitamins. So if I start off with an understanding that drugs and alcohol affect a number of organs in our body. They don't just affect our physical health, they affect our mental health. And they also take away a lot of the vitamin stores that we have in our body. And so we become very, we're very neglected. So the food that I was using were things like lots of good plant-based, high-fibre foods. So people were not having necessarily 3 serves of meat in the day. There was things like porridge or muesli for breakfast. They could have eggs. They could cook mushrooms with the eggs. And then lunch would always be something like a soup, a lentil soup, a minestrone soup. And then they'd have something for dinner, which was usually, this one here is a wholemeal chicken pasta bake. So I always used whole grains and wholemeal products, because we have 2 sorts of vitamins that we rely on in the human body. We've got water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins. The fat-soluble vitamins are the things like our vitamin D and our vitamin E, and we store those in our fat cells. The water-soluble vitamins, what we have in one day, we absorb, and the rest we urinate out. We don't store them in our body. So obviously, if we're talking about alcohol and we look at long-term repercussions like Korsakoff-Warnecki syndrome, I'm not sure if people have heard of that, but there's some terrible names for it. And I used to never like talking in negative terms to the people that were there. A lot of them, it was like a real connectedness, because they knew I would always tell them that I knew that what they were going through was an incredible journey, and this was a place in which they could pivot off and change and go in a different direction. And so it was always, if I was meeting people for a second or third time, they remembered my name, they remembered what we'd cooked, they had always positive feedback. Oh, I'm still eating brown rice sushi, or I haven't drunk Coca-Cola since I met you, because I was really doing that education based around how it affects our mental health as well as our physical health. So getting back to the Korsakoff-Warnecki syndrome, that is due to vitamin B loss. So our vitamin B and our vitamin C, I've got vitamin C here in powdered form, they are our most important water-soluble vitamins that we lose, especially if we're drinking alcohol and we're going to the toilet constantly. We are not able to maintain our vitamin C or our vitamin B levels. Vitamin B1 being the thiamine is the one that affects our brain and our cognitive behaviour. So we need to make sure that we're supplementing with those vitamins. So the food that I was providing was full of the vitamin Bs. It was full of the vitamin C. So we know that vitamins are actually something that we can go and buy, and they'll cost money, or we can actually eat them in the food. So another area that I used to focus on was the liver. The liver's our fat storing organ. So I would explain to people about the impact that the substances and the alcohol were having on our liver. And I used to use something like this as a display, and I would say, sorry, because I've got that blurry background, I would say to people, this is like our liver. It sits on the right-hand side of our body, and when it swells, when it's not working and functioning, it can swell to double its size. It's also got a porous outer surface on which things are permeable membrane. They're absorbed over the surface area. And when it stops, all those fine pores, like the pores on our skin, when we get blackheads or pimples, they become blocked and it stops being able to work properly. So it can swell to double its size. A lot of the time, that's when we get that extra weight around our midriff area. Our liver's not working properly. We get fatty liver. And we know now that, that drugs and alcohol and food, as far as I've learned, all fit in that same category of being an addiction. So if we're talking to people about, their diet, it's like you know, it's not like all the substances. I used to say you're not alone, because there's so many things now that we don't look at as being antisocial, that people develop habits to as well. And so I used to call it, I wouldn't say addiction, I would say habits. And the pathways in our brain, we're walking along straight, they might divert off into a different direction. What we want to do is rewire those pathways in the brain, and that's how we just start. And if we not eating sugar today or drinking alcohol today, we start off, there might be a physical effect of obviously that withdrawal process, but if we can support you with diet, then the process is going to be a lot quicker. And it's also going to be an amazing experience, because you're going to start here and you're going to start traveling in the right direction again. So, you know, that was how I used to like looking at it. And I mean, after 15 years, you know, people would contact me and ask me to deliver the program, this same program. And so I was working in the hospital setting, detox, youth and adults, so residential as well as the non-residential programs. The first non-residential program became 3 separate non-residential programs. So one was a forensic program, and one we came out of the realisation that most of the people that were coming to our Catalyst alcohol program actually were there with a dual diagnosis. So the whole dual diagnosis, when I think it was first started being talked about, that then became we needed to do dual diagnosis programs. And at the time, there was a lot of people in Victoria using crystal meth, and a lot of young people as well. And we know how much of an effect that has on the physical body. So I delivered programs to the AIDS Council in Victoria, to men who had been, you know, they would stay up for days just on ice, and then their nutrition was really impacted by that. So it was tips and strategies of how we can support, if we look at harm minimisation, how we can support you in times when you might be unsafe, to make sure you're drinking water, or to make sure you're eating something before you're going to go out. So the B vitamins, the food became really an amazing experience for a lot of people, because they were being treated like they should be treated, which is not as a stigmatised, marginalised group. They are human beings. It's not just people from a certain socioeconomic background that were in the programs. There were all sorts of people. It was all highly obviously private, but at the same time, I would say to people, if I see you in the street and you want to recognise me, I'm happy to say hello. And often I would bump into people with their parents, and they'd say, "Oh, this is Kate," and I'd have the parents thanking me, because it was so incredible how much they would get out of those nutrition sessions. Because when we focus, research tells us, when we focus on a skill, we're not focusing on the pain, on the thing, we can talk more freely. So it was really nutrition therapy, because I was witness to a lot of amazing young people with these stories that they'd never shared before, older people as well. And it was not just there talking about nutrition, giving a lecture. It was like this whole experience of really how you can rebuild your life. And I'll never forget one year, a young chap came back to me and he said, "Oh, you know," because a lot of people, and I'll share some I wish I could share some photos. I'll send out maybe a pack with the photos and some of the feedback, and we can send it out to everyone. But the food was like people were in a restaurant. They could not believe it. and they'd always want to be taking a photo, and they'd be sending it to their family. And it was a way of reconnecting people to their lost family members, their lost partners, their lost children, because they were so proud of what they were doing. And this one fella came back to me one week and he said, Kate, my family want me to make this brown rice sushi. I've been tasked with making the brown rice sushi for Christmas. And that was all I ever needed to hear to know that I was doing a good job, because it was a way that his family, he was accepted back into his family. And it still makes me emotional to this day. I remember all the stories. I remember all, everything that people shared to me. I used to call myself this walking urn, and sometimes things would be things that people would share things with me, and I would have to go back and tell the other staff, obviously, because it had been such a personal experience, and I was there and then I would be leaving. I couldn't do that follow-up. And the staff would say to me, oh my God, did they just tell you that? They'd never, ever talked about it ever in their lives before. And, we're talking things about, like really heinous crimes that they'd witnessed. And so that's where nutrition, I think, belongs in every setting. Now I'm obviously doing it in the setting I'm in the Northern Territory in Aboriginal health. But I believe that writing programs, making sure that we're keeping people busy around, how that can happen, how we can make it something that's affordable. Because a lot of the time I would keep the receipt and I would show people and I'd say, we've had grilled salmon, grilled asparagus, roast vegetables, roast Brussels sprouts with some sort of beautiful dressing, plus a juice. I always, for 15 years, made a liver cleansing juice with beetroot, carrot, ginger, turmeric, lemon with the skin on, pineapple, which is very good for your liver. We always had a juice, and then we'd make a wholemeal banana and strawberry cake, and it was incredible. So what would happen? I would say this cost $4 per person, and so I was able to say, give the tips about you can go to the supermarket and buy the frozen salmon, not the fresh. It's completely polluted. I wouldn't buy fresh salmon. The frozen deep sea Atlantic salmon, and it costs you $8. That's $4 a serve, and then maybe a salad on the side. And we know that the salmon obviously is an amazing, it's brain food. So we're talking about recovery of the brain as well as the physical body. And, so it was always about sharing the recipes, sharing the costs, and then saying to people, the budget at the adult detox unit, the budget for all the food actually came in under what they were paying prior to me writing the menu. So it is affordable, and we need to make sure we know and we explain to people that it's affordable.